I hope you brought your sunglasses and a gun, because we're about to grill up some savory zombie fighting action right out here in the hot Arizona sun. Shine 2. This review will contain story spoilers. If you do not wish to be spoiled, simply skip the spoiler chapter. So let's start with the technical stuff. I played Arizona Sunshine 2 on PC, using the Quest 2 air-linked with a RTX 4070 Ti with the game running on an SSD. I experienced no technical issues in my almost 11 hours of playtime. Performance was excellent, the game seems well optimized, and I'm pleasantly surprised that I didn't have to spend 20 minutes fighting to change the default controls. I will, however, be rather critical of this game moving forward. There's a lot of things I like about it, but there's also a lot of stuff that I don't like. And when determining my overall opinion about a game, the amount it costs versus the value and enjoyment I get out of it ranks high on my importance scale. Arizona Sunshine 2 costs 65 Canadian dollars, and the only other VR game currently sitting in this price range is Half-Life Alyx. Yes, I'm ignoring Legendary Tales. So by pricing Arizona Sunshine 2 in this manner, developer Vertigo Games are telling me that I should be able to expect the same level of quality and quantity of entertainment. Those are some big shoes to fill, so if the developers feel confident enough in their product to price their game accordingly, then I feel obligated to evaluate that confidence. So with all that on the table, let's get started. Arizona Sunshine 2 is a great lesson in managing expectations, an important trait to have when voyaging today's VR market, where players are so starved for new experiences that they gobble up anything that gets pumped out. That's not their fault, that's just the state of the industry right now. Arizona Sunshine 2 is a mediocre product, and for its price, is woefully lackluster. The storytelling, character arc, and overall theme are all solid, but the more important things like gameplay, mechanics, level design, they don't at all feel like they're coming from an established studio with 3 titles worth of experience under their belt. The interaction mechanics are unreliable, the level design is weak and uninspiring, the pacing doesn't make much sense, and the gameplay is so repetitive that once you've played through the first level, you've basically played the entire game. There's little to no variation throughout the campaign's lengthy runtime, and nothing stands out as noteworthy enough to remember it by. Kitty! An easy parallel I can make is Serious Sam 4, with it being far too long and not good enough to justify it, doing little to set itself apart from the 5 previous games that came before it. Arizona Sunshine 2 is much the same in that it features the same shortfalls the first game had while also failing to modernize and innovate itself, while in some areas exhibiting a straight-up regression in design choices. By most accounts, it feels outdated and lacking for a modern VR game release at this price point. So let's go ahead and start with those controls. What I found surprising was that the game's default control method was set to the mapping I usually strive for with every VR game I boot up, with movement on the left stick and rotation on the right. Now, with the wireless nature of the Quest, I don't really use rotation as much anymore because, I no longer have cables to get tangled up in, but it's useful for when I'm feeling lazy. Most VR games don't come with this setup out of the box, and they usually don't play nice when trying to change the keybinds. It's typically a hassle to switch between button mappings, or they straight up don't work when you try, or they break other controls to the point where it's just not worth trying to fix it. That wasn't the case here. It just works. Much like the other games Vertigo have made, your character has an ammo pouch on their chest, and 2 semicircles at either hip to holster weapons. You also have wrist pockets, which is a funny thing to say because what even are wrist pockets? Anyway, it's a simple control system that's a bit dated for a VR game today, but should still service an equally simple game like this. And for the most part, it does. I would have still appreciated having the option to choose where to put my ammo or weapons, like how other games like Tactical Assault VR do it. But as I said, for as simple as it is, it's good enough. What's not good enough, though, is the game's grab mechanic. For reasons unknown to science, the grab mechanic has a mind of its own, choosing when to grab items and what items to grab with no consistency whatsoever. Or never grabbing anything at all ever. I often had issues opening stuff like crates, which typically have nothing in them anyway, so what's the point of their existence if the grab mechanic is too inconsistent with when it allows you to grab regular objects, and too consistent with grabbing items you don't want. Let's get this back on you. No, I don't want that. I want the pumpkin. Making it irritating to grab stuff to the point where eventually I just gave up on it. Tick. Go the f*** over there. Fine, I'll pick the goddamn thing up. Guess I don't need that grenade. My next point requires some explanation. In most VR titles now, the game will snap your virtual hands to the location of the action you're trying to perform once your physical hands get close enough to whatever it is you're trying to interact with. And most games have a fairly generous trigger area. This is beneficial for a number of reasons, including ensurance that the intended action happens consistently, and to make sure that you don't accidentally smack the controllers together while trying to perform a motion. This sequel struggles heavily with this. Trying to insert a clip or magazine, trying to rack the slide back, it requires you to put the controllers so close together that I end up smacking them into each other while still not being able to perform my action. This is not only immersion breaking, but game breaking as well, because now I have physical barriers blocking my ability to perform in-game actions, which rarely allow me to make my moves consistently. This goes from mild annoyance when the pace is slow to rage-inducing when I have to make those movements quickly during a fight. Now, this isn't this game's fault entirely, as it highlights the design flaw of the Quest 2 controllers. And I don't think there's an easy fix to this, besides spending way too much money on the Pro controllers. This issue, combined with the faulty grab mechanic, makes some weapons, like this M249, unusable due to this inconsistency. Instead of a box mag, it has a 30-round Stanag mag, which doesn't sound like much of a problem so long as you ignore that there should be the S variant, civilian version that shoots semi-only, which this one in-game does not, so it must be the military version. But then why would military-grade heavy weapons be just casually laying around in the sewers without box mags?
That's not YouTube friendly.
More importantly, however, due to the placement of the magazine well, trying to insert a new mag will simply put it back into your pouch, as shown here.
Oh, getting light on ammo.
Or just don't work. That's good. Yeah, thanks for not working. At all.
So I then make the long trek from the checkpoint back to that spot and I try again.
Oh, we're gonna do this again, are we? Why won't it work? Why won't the gun fucking work?
After realizing that this isn't gonna work out the way I had hoped, I give up on the machine gun and use the M4 I already had instead, despite its lower capacity mag. Because I'm not just gonna sit here and waste my time fighting the game's controls when they actively get me killed. Let's talk about the level design now, which is arguably one of the more important parts of a video game. The level design dictates the player's engagement with the world, which further helps to immerse them in said world, and strengthens the gameplay overall. If you have a stale, uninspiring world, the player can't feel like their character is part of it, and subsequently won't stay interested in it because they're not immersed. Most VR games struggle with immersing you in the world in a satisfying way, and there are so far only a few that do a good job at it. At times, this game can feel immersive. Sometimes the atmosphere is great, but most of the time it just feels like I'm playing a generic zombie shooter. And that's saying something considering that After the Fall exists and has a more immersive world. It can also be difficult for VR games to handle small spaces, so most of the time they choose not to let you close to anything that might get you glitching out, while others have somehow been able to make this work by allowing you, at least in some capacity, to physically move yourself through small spaces, which is a neat little bit of immersion that lets you explore the nooks and crannies of the world around you in a way that further makes you believe you're actually there. This also allows developers to reward the player by hiding cute little secrets for them to seek out. From a pure gameplay perspective, this allows the player to potentially position themselves in a more advantageous manner to get an upper hand on their enemies.
Chris going across the floor, it's so good.
Now, one of my gripes with the level design here is that there aren't any secret areas to find that fit this description, so there's no incentive to explore beyond the main path. And when there is a side route to take, it doesn't go anywhere or do anything special enough to warrant the player's time investment. And on the tactical side of things, well, there's never an opportunity to use the terrain or buildings for cover because there aren't any. But also you don't need to because zombies don't shoot back. But still, it would be nice to find some alternate route, or have multiple avenues of attack available to me instead of the one predetermined by the game. The maps are mostly just empty space. To make things even worse, I've scrolled down too far and I can't read my script. To make things even worse, your ability to navigate the world is limited to basic movement on flat ground. Don't even think about taking on small hills, or God forbid, ledges. You see this ledge? Wanna drop down it? Well, you can't, so sucks for you. There's a ramp here, and sure, there's nothing but sadness at the top, but maybe you just want to walk up the ramp. Well, too bad for you. No ramps allowed. Flat ground only. You've heard of OnlyFans, now get ready for Only Stairs. Except credit where credit is due in this specific spot, because there's no ledge at the top, so if I fall, I soft lock myself. But even then, just put a fence along the top like you did with the rest of the catwalk. They've put invisible walls in far too many places that just don't make any sense for them to be there, which combined with your character's limited mobility completely ruins your ability to navigate the world in a satisfying manner. Stuff like this becomes a gigantic problem when I'm trying to sidestep or kite the zombies only to suddenly stop moving, and when I turn around to see what's blocking me, there's nothing there, but I still can't move, and now the zombies are hitting me, and now I'm dead because of some stupid wall that I can't see that shouldn't even be there in the first place. VR's big selling point is being able to do the things you can't normally do in video games. Movement and positioning play a massive role here. If the game blocks my path but then shows me a crawl space large enough for me to physically fit through, I should be allowed to get down on my knees and crawl through that space. But no. Whenever this happens, there's just an invisible wall in the way blocking your ability to go through it, because the game wants you to take its predetermined path instead. No out-of-the-box thinking here. Why make it look like I can crawl through this space, but then don't let me actually do it? That's the whole draw of VR. If I think to myself, hey, I want to go prone here to give myself a tactical advantage, the game should allow me to do that. If I want to squeeze into some small space, like underneath this train car here to avoid detection from the enemies, the game should let me do that too. That's VR's biggest strength, yet Vertigo completely ignored it for a basic and boring map layout that doesn't let me flex my critical thinking skills. Ugh. It's so restrictive, in fact, that you're not even able to go into spots you'd normally think are normal places you could get into. Like this spot here near the start of the game. For whatever reason, there's a bunch of invisible walls here which don't allow you to get behind this barricade. Now sure, there's nothing back there, but why block it off? What's the point? Why limit our mobility so significantly? In real life, I can easily squeeze into a small space like in between these train cars. I could easily climb this small hill. I could effortlessly jump off this ledge. Watch. So why in the great waterfalls of New Brunswick can I not do it here? In a $60 VR game where movement and interactability play key roles in the genre. I just honestly do not understand what the level designers were thinking when they made the choice to restrict the player's mobility so drastically. There has to be more going on here. If it were maybe a comfort decision, then perhaps I could understand it. An attempt to prevent the player from getting lost and possibly disoriented. Sure. But then if that's the case, why make the player dangle 30-something feet off the ground a few minutes into the game? Most of this game feels like a corridor shooter anyway, but then it also feels like it's trying to be an action-adventure game without the exploration to back it up. The level design as a whole is far too narrow. The gameplay as a whole isn't fast enough. And when it is fast, the level design doesn't complement it at all, so it sucks. The mechanics aren't intuitive enough, the pacing is inconsistent, it's just none of it is done very well. If I wanted a game this simple, I'd go play After the Fall, because at least there I'm not expecting exploration and interactability. Let's talk about that now. Oh wait, there's nothing to talk about because there's nothing to interact with. We're 5 years past the releases of games like Half-Life Alyx and Boneworks, where you're allowed to basically pick up anything you see laying on the ground. It is simply unacceptable in this day and age to release a VR game like this at this price point and not include physics-based interactability. I mean, for Christ's sake, the technology to allow me to pick up whatever I want in video games has been around for at least 20 years now, with the release of Half-Life 2 back in 2004. Or if you ask Google, 1998, with the release of a game I've never heard of called Trespasser. The VR genre is the perfect opportunity to put physics stuff into a game, even if it's just to pick up stuff and throw it around. Oh, but wait! I can already do that in Arizona Sunshine 2, but only with small objects like bottles. So then, why only allow me to pick up small objects and not big objects? Do I need to aimlessly throw boxes and pylons around? Of course not. But I want to.
Man, I wish my car had a trunk this big. The thing's huge.
And I should be allowed to do so. But does any of that serve a useful purpose to gameplay? No, but it could if the developers were to implement physics-based puzzles or gameplay elements, which would also serve as an important reminder that the world around me is alive and not just a static, lifeless video game. All this makes it feel like I'm in this disconnected bubble where I cannot truly interact with the game world. I can't go see anything, or touch anything, or go anywhere that the game doesn't want me to. I'm supposed to just trot along the main campaign path. No exploration, no sightseeing, none of that. I'm being constantly reminded at every turn that I'm playing this outdated, bare bones, unintuitive VR game that has absolutely no right being this expensive. And the lighting. What is wrong with the lighting in this game? Lighting plays a big part in map design for setting the tone, helping the player navigate, making the world look pretty. I can name a ton of examples that use lighting in fun and creative ways to help convey their message or guide the player to their destination. Arizona Sunshine 2 is sadly not one of those games on that list. Throughout its campaign, the game shifts from a few lighting variations to borderline unplayable by removing any mention of light whatsoever. Now, a lot of VR games have already done this, so by this point the trope is getting old. In fact, I'd argue it was already old by the time Half-Life Alyx rolled around, and the only thing in my opinion that kept HLA's dark maps from being too annoying was the fact that they featured shakeups in enemy design or gameplay puzzles to keep things fresh. That way you weren't just doing the same thing as before, but now in the dark. Oh, and also there's...
What the hell was that?
But even then, there are still far too many areas in HLA where it's just you and your torch wandering around in complete darkness while getting swung at by the odd zombie. The zombies. Let's talk about the zombies now. Wait, hold on. No, I'm not done complaining about the lighting. There are other games in the VR space that do a better job at handling dark environments to convey emotion. Phasmophobia is one that excels at conveying that creepy, scary, claustrophobic atmosphere because it relies on uncertainty. You never know when the ghost will do something.
How many people have you killed? Shit.
But it also gives you the ability to directly control where your light is being shone, so you have the power to shine the light on whatever you need to see directly.
Oh, we're dead. Are you dead? Oh, he's dead.
This game doesn't have that uncertainty. It doesn't have that suspense because it doesn't implement any changes to the level design or enemy design to force me into a different playstyle. But then it also doesn't present any special set pieces or shifts in atmosphere to put me on edge. It's just the same simple zombie shooting mechanics and dull, visually unpleasant locations, but now I can't see because it's far too dark and the flashlight they give you is far too weak, plus they take control of it away from you so you can't direct it where you need it. Do you know what other VR game handles dark environments better than Arizona Sunshine 2? Half-Life Alyx. No, just kidding, it's Arizona Sunshine 1. From way back in 2016, made by the same developers. The flashlight is nice and bright, the environments are lit in a more comfortable and realistic manner, and they allow you direct control of the flashlight to help you aim at what you need to shoot at. Just ignore the seizure-inducing muzzle flash when you fire in full auto. The whole point of making the map super dark is to scare the player and prevent them from being able to see. But then you also have to give them tools to allow them to see just a little bit, to keep them on edge, but to also keep them confident enough that they know how to defend themselves when they need to. Far too much of this game takes place in the dark where the flashlight that the game gives you isn't bright enough to actually help you see. And again, because there's no variation in the way the game plays, you're still just shooting the same one type of zombie over and over again, but now in the dark and you can barely see and I feel like I'm going insane. And it just gets boring. Back to the zombie AI. It too, like the rest of this game, is inconsistent. Sometimes they see you from across the map, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they notice when you shoot a zombie right next to them, but also sometimes they don't. There's no consistency. You can even walk right up to them and they just kind of stand there. And this is because the game wants you to shove grenades in their mouths, which is really only useful like exactly once and totally not a gimmick you'll forget even exists because this game doesn't give you many opportunities to make this feature worthwhile. Oh, and the melee sucks. Anyway, moving on. Since I'm talking about the zombies, now would be a good time to talk about the pacing. I've already mentioned how the pacing sometimes doesn't make sense, but now it's time to explain what I mean by that. To call it bad overall would be an exaggeration, because in general, it's fairly decent. It's not good enough to call it good, but it's not bad enough to call it bad. so it's just kind of somewhere in the middle. But then there will be areas where it's so poorly paced that it severely sours whatever enjoyment I was having prior to that moment. Most of the levels consist of walking through areas populated with, I'd say, an average amount of zombies. Not too many, not too little, just a normal amount, I guess. Nothing crazy like Left 4 Dead, but not sparse enough to bore me. And this complements the overall balance, which I'll talk about in a moment. But then, the game will just throw a large pile of zombies at me without warning. Most of the time without special set pieces or any indication that a horde is on the way. The most frustrating thing about this is that the game gives me no time to prepare for this. The zombies just show up and are all of a sudden hugging my face. To make it worse, they come from every direction all at once, so I just immediately get swarmed with no time to comprehend the threat level or the ability to defend myself, and I just die right away. The amount of times I'll just randomly have a zombie stroll up to my back and start wailing away is far too great, and it pisses me off to no end because it's so goddamn unfair. There's no satisfaction in these moments because the game doesn't do this at the right time or location to let me mentally or physically prepare myself.
Are you serious? Why would you throw zombies at me without even warning me that they're there?
One thing I think this game does well is its implementation of controller smoothing. Your character's hands don't jitter around so much when you're trying to aim. And it's a small but noble feature that further immerses us in the world, because jittery hands are distracting and rather unrealistic. If I aim a gun in real life, which I don't really know how to do and I'll get into in just a second, my hands are not going to spaz out as much as they do in VR games because the gun is bigger and heavier in real life than a VR controller is. It also means that your shots can generally be more accurate. Yet, I still miss 80% of my shots, which unfortunately leads me to another gripe I have. There are, as far as the release of this review, no optical sights to be found. No red dots, no hollow sights, no scopes. Why is this a problem? Well, let me show you. If you can't already tell by the footage, I clearly haven't had any real-life firearms training or experience. Therefore, I have no knowledge on how to properly handle one. I don't know how to hold them, how to position my body to aim, and so without the help of attachment scopes, I end up missing most of my shots because I'm not holding the weapon correctly. This is a really big problem in games like this, where the core gameplay loop consists of you shooting guns at zombies. And there are few things in life less satisfying than missing a shot point blank. Now, I know that this is definitely a me problem, and you could argue that, yeah, I should probably just get good, but with how accurate to life I assume these games are now when it comes to handling firearms, developers cannot just assume that their player base are experts at handling weapons. And if you're not going to at least give us a laser sight, we need some sort of optic to help us aim the weapon. Otherwise, inexperienced players like me are just gonna get frustrated by repeatedly missing our shots that eventually we just give up. Now, I knew going in that I was a bad shot, so I expected this, but it still doesn't make it very fun, and although it is satisfying when your shot does land, the ratio is usually so one-sided that the satisfaction is replaced instead by mere frustration. A newcomer to VR might pick this game up not knowing why they're missing their shots so often, and they might end up blaming the game for not registering hits due to their inexperience. Now, I get that marksmanship is part of the sport, but in a genre like this where fast precision is key to your survival, having something easier for novice and more casual players to use makes the game much more accessible. Now, I'm not asking for every gun laying on the ground to have an optic, because that would be unrealistic given the setting, but rather, at the very least, give us the ability to craft makeshift sites with the resources we collect, which would utilize the crafting system the game ships with. Then, as the campaign progresses, scatter upgraded, or maybe even military parts around for the player to find. This would keep things balanced while still allowing us to have the upgrades we need, and if the more experienced players want to stick with their stock iron sights, then they are free to do so as well. The crafting system. Were you surprised to hear one's been put in here? Because so was I when I stumbled into the first crafting case. As the campaign progresses, you'll find random objects you can collect, like glue, water bottles, and other random pieces of garbage that seemingly have no purpose because the game never tells you that you need them. All you get is a small voice line by your character here or there.
Oh, this is my kind of garbage. This right here.
So when you encounter the first crafting station, you might not be able to craft much because you weren't told the importance of those items until after they're gone.
Yeah, okay. I got enough parts for this.
Let's now compare this with how Half-Life Alyx handles it.
Ah, would you look at that? Resin. And if there's resin around here, there should be a combine fabricator. Keep an eye out. We might be able to upgrade your firepower a bit.
HLA does a much better job at telling you what resin is, what it looks like, why you need it, and what you need to do with it. Now, in the back of your mind, you know what to look out for, and you're on the lookout for something that might resemble an upgrade station. And sure enough, once you see it, the characters spring into action to tell you that it is what you think it is, and the steps you need to take to unlock it.
Alex, I think that's a combine fabricator. Put something in it. I want to see how this thing works.
Got it. Will it work on the Russells?
No, but it should fix up that pistol nicely.
I don't have enough resin for any of this stuff.
Ah, well, you know what they say about resin, Alex.
No, what do they say about resin, Russ?
Look for more resin. Oh, that really worked, didn't it? Huh.
Vertigo dropped the ball hard with this. They even have you play as a character who talks to himself all the time. So why not make him introduce the idea of collecting resources and using the crafting system in a more clear-cut manner? You need to give the player a more direct understanding of why they should do whatever it is you're trying to entice them to do, because if they don't think it's worth their time, they won't do it. Case in point, me. I rarely used the crafting stations until the tail end of my playthrough because I didn't see any value in what they gave me, up until I got bored with simply shooting the zombies with guns, so I opted for a more explosive playthrough. The developers unknowingly served themselves a silver platter by building the character the way they did, but then missed their chance to make that opportunity count by serving up information to the player in a creative and direct way in line with their game's themes.
And sit. Who's a handsome boy?
Following the topic of collecting stuff, Arizona Sunshine 2's theme, as you are no doubt aware by now, is that of a zombie apocalypse. So with that comes the expectation that you are to survive the backwaters of the Canyon State in search of supplies to aid you in your travels. This inherently creates the gameplay loop of searching the entire map only to find one item pickup here, one ammo magazine there, because supplies are meant to be scarce. If done right, this can be engaging and rewarding. Yet it's annoying here because it feels like the game is wasting my time on purpose. There are too many openable containers with nothing in them, which means that when you find an occupied one, it's unsatisfying to collect just one or two magazines. Yet from a balance perspective, this works out well because it prevents you from using just one weapon all the time. You'll end up collecting more secondary ammo while gradually depleting your primary, thus forcing you to switch. At no point in my playthrough did I feel like I had enough ammo, but then I also never felt like I'd run out. I always had just enough for whatever encounter I engaged in, which, as annoying as that was, is honestly the perfect balance to have in a setting like this, because you want your player to sweat just a little bit, keeping them on edge, enticing them not to mag dump every zombie they see. Now, of course, if you do that, you will run out and then softlock yourself, so it's best not to do that, but still, I enjoyed that the game made me switch weapons often to push me out of the comfort zones I'd set for myself when I acquired an abundance of one ammo type. Now, if you came here looking for needless skill trees, exhaustive character progression screens, or unfilling cosmetic unlocks, then I'm happy to tell you that you won't find any of that here. You just shoot zombies. What more could you ask for? That's all I ever wanted, that's all I ever expected, and that's all I get, and that's fine. As I've said before, there needed to be more variety in level design, shakeups in gameplay, and I would have loved to see a few different zombie types, but adding skill trees and meaningless progression paths are not what would have made this game better. Expanding upon the core gameplay concepts to keep things fresh and interactive is what should have been added, because at its core, it's fine. It doesn't need to be time-wastingly complicated, and I'm glad that it isn't. Let me now take some time to reflect on what I think are some of Arizona Sunshine 2's more endearing qualities, including its story and the character you play as.
Why the hell did I lock this? Where did I put the key?
This chapter will contain spoilers, so please skip ahead if you're planning on playing the game and don't want its story spoiled to you. This game does a great job of putting you in the shoes of its protagonist, a man of unknown name who's somehow managed to survive the zombie apocalypse by hiding away inside of various trailers which may or may not be his, drinking beers and shooting Freds that encroach upon his domicile. It's the clever writing and supreme voice talent of Sky Soleil that sell the themes of isolation and desperation that kept me invested long after the gameplay lost its touch.
I really tied one on last night. Oh, my head. I am parched. Oh, I'm so thirsty. Oh, right. I pissed in that one. All right. I put a cigarette out in that one. All right. I barfed in that one.
It follows a compelling narrative with enough charm and world-building detail provided by the protagonist to keep me wondering where the story goes.
Well, there's a further metaphor. Hey, Fred. Fancy seeing you here.
Although it does contradict the ending of the first game, but let's not worry about that for now. So it starts with some pretty dark themes to set the tone, and right off the bat, we know that, oh boy, he ain't right.
You know, Fred, last night, I finally worked up the courage to try and drink myself out of here. Permanently. But it didn't work. I still woke up. Still stuck with you. I got a gun. Maybe it's time I tried the direct approach, huh?
This man is depressed. He's lost his sense of purpose, hasn't seen another human being in who knows how long, has little hope left for his future, and isn't quite sure what else to do other than wallow away in his sadness. So it makes sense that when, of all things, a military helicopter crashes nearby, he damn near loses his mind.
Hey, down here! Hey, Freddy! Oh, I gotta get over there! I gotta get over there!
Now, given the state of the crash from this angle, it's quite clear no one has survived. In fact, I'm honestly surprised the helicopter managed to stay in one piece when it smacked itself off the mountain there, but it's a video game. But our man is too caught up in the idea of finally getting out of here alive, and or maybe seeing another living human being for that matter, that the only thing he can think of is to abandon the safety of his trailer in favor of the slim chance at salvation.
What you got on your wrists there, guy? Huh?
Believe me when I tell you, gentlemen, we can solve this problem once and for all. We can make the serum, but we can't do it without patient zero. Their genetic code is vital to the process.
No way. They're trying to make a vaccine.
A gas station out on 43rd. The cashier, Travis Smith. You need to get over there and find him.
Now, finally, he has a potential escape plan.
If I find patient zero first, then they'll find me.
But of course, he won't be alone in this adventure.
Hey there. Nice to meet you, little guy. Want to be friends? Okay, what can I tempt you out with?
So the two set forth to find Patient Zero and maybe get their lives back.
You sure are good at being a dog. You know, you got a good-shaped head. I like it. Nice work, buddy. Ooh, that's a good name for you. Buddy. You like it? Okay, buddy it is. Hot diggity dog. Okay, so, your dead friend there, sounds like he was looking for patient zero, so I figure if we find them first, then the military are gonna come find us. Yeah, and that, my furry little friend, is how we get rescued.
What I really like about this story is that we're just some guy. We're not some elite special forces operator who can take 1,000 punches while mowing down hundreds of zombies at once. We're not part of some special response or containment department assigned to retrieve things within the zombie zone. We're not even a police officer or anything like that. We're just some guy. Some untrained dude who's not prepared for this in any way, shape, or form, who's had to keep to himself and use what little street smarts he has just to survive. He hasn't necessarily made the smartest choices, he's not that tough, but he's not incompetent either. He knows where his strengths are, and knows that fighting is not one of them. But he's out of his element here. So instead, he runs. And he's pretty good at that. There are a few sequences in the game where we are tasked with outrunning the zombie horde. And in a gameplay sense, it's very anticlimactic and pretty boring because all you do is stand still in one place while holding the stick forward. But from a story perspective, it fits well. Before long, he makes it to the gas station, the apparent location of Patient Zero.
Yoo-hoo, Patient Zero, where are you?
Only Patient Zero isn't here. So we check the tapes to see where they could have gone.
Ah! You bit me! You sons of bitches! I know where your clubhouse is!
Eventually, we make it to the biker hideout, and this is when our man starts to notice something about our furry little friend.
Wait a second. Buddy, is that you in the picture? You look identical. What is it? You think our guy's in there? I've been looking for you, motherfucker! Oh my god. No, buddy. Buddy, are you okay?
And now what follows is a harrowing rescue of our poor pupper as we desperately make it back to that animal hospital we passed earlier.
Nom 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 nom.
With Buddy on the table, we're now tasked with literally patching up the dog by finding bandages scattered around the vet clinic. I'm not quite sure if YouTube will allow me to show this to you, so I've blurred it out to save your tender heart from breakage and also my channel from demonetization. But rest assured, this is a very emotional part of the game. It pulls at your heartstrings, and I didn't sign up to feel when I started playing this game. Once you find the bandages, you are directly responsible for pulling out the metal shards stuck inside Buddy. All the while, he cries and whimpers, and I totally didn't have tears streaming down my face during this sequence. If you go too quickly, it hurts him, so you gotta be slow and steady and careful. Now, I'm not sure if petting him helps to calm him down, but it sure helped me. And look, here's the thing. Doing all this in VR makes it a lot more personal. Because you're not just pressing buttons on a keyboard, you're carefully pulling out the shards, putting bandages on the dog. This physicality and the sheer realness of this situation tricks the brain into subtly believing that this is, well, somewhat real. And that's one of the biggest emotional strengths of VR. The perceived realness of something completely fake simply because your vision is surrounded by 3D space, and you need to physically do things to make things happen.
Hello, I'm on this channel. Holy shit, can you hear me for real?
Yes, we hear you. For real. Identify yourself.
Oh my god. I haven't spoken to another human being in I don't even know how long. Identify myself. I'm just a guy, a lone survivor, but I saw your guy flying the chopper. He crashed. He didn't make it. I'm sorry, but I found his dog. I got his dog, and we've been looking for Patient Zero together. And I think we almost had him, but he got away. Sorry about that too. But where are you? I need to get to you.
You took the pilot's dog.
Yeah. But he's good. He's okay. I'm out near Sunset Boulevard. Can you come get me? Pretty please.
Actually, that's not the pilot's dog. That's my dog.
Oh, well, he's okay. Can you come get us?
I wish I could. We don't have the resources right now. If you're on Sunset, you must be near the train depot. Now, here's what we're going to do. Head there. Follow the tracks north. Walk until you get to Compañero Station. We'll meet you there.
So, now we know that the owner of the dog is alive, and we have a real human person who we just talked to who will be waiting for us at the train station.
Oh, hey, I've been calling your dog Buddy. What's his real name?
Wolfie. We'll see you both at Compañero. Over and out.
Wolfie? Oh, no. I think Buddy suits you way better.
A small horde break through the door, and with our heightened desire to protect our doggo friend, we make quick work of those zombies with vengeance. And now, with Wolfie, yeah, I agree, Buddy's better. With Buddy patched up and ready to go again, we continue on.
Being an animal doctor was way easier than I thought.
Along the way, our character makes some pretty concerning concessions to his puppy pal. Stuff that he probably wouldn't say to another human being.
This is nice, buddy. Being out here with you. I haven't had someone I can rely on in, I don't know, a long time. You know, there was a guy in Florida who married his dog. Just something to think about, okay? If I hadn't found you, I think I might have lost my mind. Which I promise I have not already done.
It's endearing to be in these moments while our protagonist shares his feelings and his backstory. We get little tidbits about what his life was like in the past, and he expresses to his new friend how the apocalypse has affected him. In many ways, the dog acts as a therapist for him, always there, always listening, and providing comfort when needed. We then make it to the depot.
What do you say we hijack this bad boy so we can get to the army sooner? Because no offense to you, bud, but I'm ready to see some people.
Board the train, travel some distance.
You're the guy with my dog.
Yes, yeah. Wolfie, right? Listen, I'm gonna be there sooner than planned. We got a train working and we're heading north.
You're on a train?
Yeah, pretty cool, huh?
God damn it. Listen to me. The Amber Pass is out.
The what?
The bridge! The bridge is out!
Shit. That's not good. Buddy, get out of there! Shit!
Crash the train, and continue on. Okay. What I don't like about the storytelling is that every time something fun happens, the game just fades to black and plays me an audio file instead.
Shit!
I don't want to listen to the train crashing. I want to see the train crashing. I'm already in the train, so just show me that. We eventually get too tired to continue on, so we decide to rest on a conveniently placed sleeping bag inside the safety of the sewer.
You make a good point, buddy. I'm exhausted too. Maybe we should bed down for a little while. Here we go. Another day. Hey, buddy. How you doing? Let's go find the army guys. My sister was supposed to take these every day when she got cancer. But they're expensive, you know, buddy? Crazy expensive.
We then spend the rest of that day and the following night on the move to a military checkpoint.
Military checkpoint! Oh!
And finally...
Down here! Down here! God damn it! How do you not see us? Salute! Dumb fucking asshole!
Eventually...
Damn. It's getting too dark. How the hell are we gonna signal to the army?
Well... Look, I don't know what happens next. Because... And I don't like leaving you in suspense like this, but this is where I stopped playing. So I don't know where we end up, or what fate awaits our protagonist. But I hear the burning question in the back of your mind right now. Why did I stop playing? Well, despite my interest in the story, with all the constant, everlasting problems I had faced with the game, the poor level design, the incompetent pacing, the frustrating controls, the perpetually mediocre gameplay, every problem I had kept compounding into one large snowball of suck that by this point I just could not will myself to continue playing. I wanted the game to be over. I had stopped having fun a while ago, and now I was only playing the game simply to finish it. And boy oh boy did it feel like a chore. I wasn't quite sure how much longer I had to go, but it felt like it would just keep dragging on forever, and I simply couldn't take it anymore. I remember my friends at the time asking me how the game was going, and I remember replying with loathfulness while expressing apprehension at the fact that I had to keep playing. I remember one of them simply asking me, if you're not enjoying it, then why don't you just stop? And I'm like, well, I can't just stop, I'm committed. I don't know how long I have, but I've got to be close to the end, and I'm making a review video, so I have to finish the game. And they said to me, I mean, you don't have to finish it if you're not liking it. And I'm like, you know, you're right. So I just stopped. Because if the game isn't respecting my time, why should I continue putting time into it? Do I recommend Arizona Sunshine 2? Short answer is no. Long answer is, if you see it on sale, maybe. It's fun for a few hours, and the story and atmosphere are great, but the gameplay is nowhere near complete enough or polished enough to justify its price tag. It needed a lot more time in the oven to solidify its foundation, and a lot more thought put into its ideas to make the game stand out in the VR industry, and as a worthwhile sequel to the first installment. I had medium to high levels of expectations, considering how much fun I had with Arizona Sunshine 1. I expected more of the same, but better, improvements and additions to the core of what made the first game enjoyable. Yet all I got was exactly more of the same, with downgrades in some areas, puzzles that aren't really all that fun, and seemingly no meaningful improvements to gameplay at all. The newly added features are glitchy and unintuitive. Even the basic VR mechanics aren't polished enough to enjoy the game at face value. And if you can't even get the basics right, how are you supposed to go deeper than that with more complicated concepts and wow the player? You can't. Arizona Sunshine 2 needed more time to cook before release. It did not get that time, and it suffered as a result.